Hi, my name is Falgun and I work as a developer at Montel. I've been working with Flutter. I've started working with Flutter quite recently. I have done participated at least in two projects with Flutter, so it's quite interesting for me and I really like working with it. My okay, yeah, this is my introduction. So uh, I when I started working with Flutter, I kind of joined the first project in the middle, and it was already using a different state management technique like Redux. So that was my first exposure to Flutter with Redux. So I started working with Redux. It was okay. It was everything was like a learning experience initially, so it was okay. I was working with Redux, but then for the next project, I wanted to try something else. So I did started like doing more research on the state management options that there were, and more about Flutter. So then I came across the block pattern basically. So the block pattern is like an architectural pattern which like lets you divide the business logic from the UI and like separate the app into like more different layers. So this is one of the most popular block library for Flutter. It's Flutter Block. It's maintained and like I think it's also developed by Felix. Some stats from the pop.dev. Then the definition that what it stands for, what it actually does. It's like a business logic controller, so it just separates the business logic from the UI, as I already mentioned. So I started working with this on the next project, and it was quite a learning experience for me because I had no idea how it works. I had not worked with streams that much, so I started like doing more research. It was a little stressful initially, but let's talk more about what actually block does. So when you develop an app using the blackboard pattern, you basically separate the whole application into like different layers. So there's the UI layer, which you keep completely separate from the business logic. Then you have the block itself, which contains where you actually listen to events and manipulate the state or like fire states. Then you have the repository, which they say is responsible for storing the data for the app, and then the data sources. The data sources is something that basically so basically the repository is like the abstraction layer which gets the data from the data sources. I personally haven't never like done like a separate data source for my blocks because I've never had the situation. But what I've understood is like there are certain situations, ideally when you might have like multiple data sources. So to get data from those multiple data sources, if you have like multiple data sources, for example, if you have the database and also if you're calling API endpoints to get data, I think in that scenario you might want to have like separate data, like a data source for separately, and then use a repository to interact with and get the fetch the data from there. So these are like the four basic like components of the block architecture. Then the block itself mainly relies on like four main concepts, or I don't know, like the most important things that you use with the block. So there's the block builder, actually block provider, then block builder, then block listener, and block consumer. So all these are like widgets. Some of them are like used for dependency injection, and some of them are used to just rebuild the UI based on what the state state is. Uh, and this is taken from a YouTube. So full credits to the original owner. Okay, so the first concept that I want to like talk about is the block provider. So basically, what block provider does is that its main function is to provide the block to its children. So you whatever widget you hook the block provider onto, the child that particular widget and its children gets the block. and you can access the block in the children by using like the same block. I think the main idea behind this is that you avoid uh, basically creating like a block instance of a block in every view or in every page, and you just pass the same instance to the children, so there are like less instances created. As you can clearly see, like only the children of the widget that gets the block provider gets the block itself. So in the image on the right side, only the children get the block, like the green tick marks. But you can also, like, for example, if you have like a certain block which is required all throughout the app, then you can obviously hook it up onto the main app, so the whole app has access to the block, for example, like the authentication, for instance, or for instance, like internet connectivity. If you have, like, if you're checking that. Yeah, these are like some points about the provider. So it provides the block to its children, creates the block, and also closes the block. Yeah, it's like because you can, like I said, like you just use the same instance and you provide the same instance to the children, so you don't create like a new instance. Not a very good practice. And the first example is directly from the documentation of how you can create like a block, and the second example is how you provide the value of the block to its children. So, for example, in the second example, you basically provide the block instance to screen A, and then from screen A you can provide to the other children if you want. But like all the widgets or the whole screen A widget gets the block A basically. This is like one way of accessing the block. So once you have provided the block to the, for instance, the screen A, you can then access the block using context or read, or without the extension, like you can use the full block provider of. And then from here, you can fire on to the widgets, and then you can access the state and do the UI. I think this is, I think, the second most used block widget. This is what exactly like builds the UI. So you basically hook the block builder onto the widgets, and then you listen to states, and based on the states, you build the UI. So and if this the block builder returns the widget, basically the widget, the same widget that you hook the block builder to, and then it also additionally it gives you like a build when function, which provides you with the previous state and the current state. So based on the values of the current state and previous state, you can like it returns like you can get like true like a boolean, and then based on that you can build the widget based on the value. The block listener is also like it's also like a block widget, but instead of like rebuilding the whole UI, it only listens to the state of the block. So basically, you would hook the block builder to widgets or views where you do not want to rebuild the UI, or just rather want to listen to the states, and maybe you want to fire some methods to manipulate values or something like that. And also the block listener, it gives you two additional methods, where the listen when and listener. The listener is the main method where you actually listen to the state, and the listen when is the same, like which gives you access to the previous state and the state, and you can, based on the values, you can check if you want to like do more stuff. The third one is the block consumer, and it is nothing but like a hybrid of block builder and block consumer. So basically, it exposes you the functionalities of the block listener as well as the block consumer. It's more or less the same. Yeah. Then there was like I said, like when I started with Flutter, I started with Redux. So this is like something that I found on my own and from the internet. Some of the differences like between block and Redux. Now that I've worked more with blocks, I find, at least personally, like I find block more like easy to like debug, for instance, and also like use in the application. But like some of the major differences, I think if you have already been working with React or Redux or so you already know like Redux gives you like a central store, while block you can have like multiple blocks and multiple repositories to store different values, so you don't have to be like manipulating the same, for example, like a same block for different values. You can completely keep the logic separate for like each functionality. I think that is like really nice. There's a very good amount of like community support, at least for block. I highly recommend if you're working, just the Discord server is like very active, and there's a lot of support for that.
There is one part also, the documentation for Flutter
Yes.
is fabulous.
It is really good. That is true. The documentation is also like very detailed with like a lot of examples and stuff. Yeah, I think it was much easier for me to have like a more modularized application when I used block compared to Redux. And there are like now even more, because I have never like personally worked with provider, so I know like the basics of how it works, but I've not had the chance to use it. But maybe hopefully in the future I would want to like move to a different one, use the provider package. I've heard also like the river port.
Yeah, try that.
It's really good. Yeah. And then somebody was telling me that Liverport is also by the same creator. And
it's made by Ramirez.
Yeah, and if you rearrange the word provider, you can do Liverport. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that, but yeah. So yeah, but this is all about like the block.
One of the key differences I would like to sort of mention is, of course, that block is more like a complete architecture than like a provider and Riverport.
Yeah.
So that is in one sense. And originally, of course, the architecture was developed by Google so that they could share code between Flutter and Angular.
Okay. Yeah.
The business logic they could sort of share them between these applications. That's where the sort of business logic component came from.
In block, there are literally two layers of abstraction, really. You're dealing with either qubits or proper blocks.
Yeah.
Can you talk about qubits a bit? Because I'm personally a big provider guy, and I like how it's not opinionated. And I look at block. Back in the day, it was, as you say, lots of boilerplate, so it wasn't that appealing. But then qubits do look pretty intuitive and easy to use. Yeah. So where is it?
Yeah. I think like when I've used like I've also had this question. I've done like a little bit of research also. Like the most simplest answer that I found when I was comparing block versus qubit was that a block is too complex for a very simple operation. For example, if you're just fetching a list of names from an API, you don't really need a block for that. So in that case, qubit is a much like simpler option. It's like less code, and you can just, instead of events, I think it uses the methods. And then you can just fetch whatever you want if it's like a more or less like a one-way operation. And then you can hook a qubit as the same way as block. So everything else works the same. So basically the state changes and everything works the same, but you use like less code for like very simple operation. So I think this is what like I have understood, because I've always also used like a mixture. So for like simple operations, I never like wrote like a complete block for it. It's like a very simple operation. I just created.
In your code, what's the ratio of qubits to blocks?
It's comparatively less, because I try to like use like the block for like multiple things. But for qubit, it's mainly been, like I said, like if I have to just fetch a list of names which I need to again like query or use somewhere else, I would use qubit. For example, there I think I used it for at least for fetching images. So from the user ID, basically there was a separate API to get the actual image. So for that I used qubit, because I don't think block makes much sense in that kind of operations. But that has been like my experience.
One more question. How's API stability in block these days? Because it seems like it's on version 5 or 6, like it's quite far ahead. And it, I remember when I played with block back in the day, version like 1.0, I didn't touch the project for a few years, and I opened it up again, and it's like nothing has obviously worked, and the API changed quite dramatically. So how stable is block, considering that it's opinionated?
It's hard to say, because when you used the version that you worked with, I have no idea how unstable it was at that point. But the thing that I know is that there's a very like there's a strong and constant like development happening on block. So I feel that I have at least never had an issue in terms of instability, and so I don't know, maybe you should try now, and then I should like downgrade.
The PTSD from that time I used
it. But yeah, it's.
Sorry. Can you still elaborate on when would you actually use block instead of qubit? Because I've built, I think, 3 apps using only qubit, and I've never found a case where I would need complete block.
Would you use a block, like, you think a block, like, how would you use a block, for instance, for like a search field?
Block?
Or a qubit, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think that a block, because it uses streams already. So I think like if you use the block, for instance, for a search field, like for a search API basically, then block makes more sense, because then you can just keep feeding, like, for example, on the search like text field, you have this on changed, I guess, the listener, and based on like every on changed event, you can pass an event to the block, and then it can emit it can keep emitting the state. I mean, like, this is how I've used at least block with like the search. So now I'm curious again, like, how would qubit work the same way?
I'd say so, yeah. Why not? Why couldn't you use qubit in that as well? Of course, I don't know if block would be better in that case. I haven't tried it in that case even, but I can see how I would do it in qubit. Definitely.
Okay, but do you do the same way in qubit? Like,
yes. Yeah, you can just, I mean, what did you say? Like, how would you do it in block?
Yeah, I'm like, can you just keep feeding events to the qubit as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so I don't know, then maybe there is like some more detailed differences that someone else can like point out. But I mean, like, this is the one example that came to my mind, for which I thought that block might have like an upper hand.
I mean, personally, I like to use block more than qubit, especially in more like complicated classes or like complicated widgets, just for the readability. Because I always feel that when I have like so many events, so like lots of interaction from the user, it makes sense for me as a developer. Instead of looking for the code, I can just go to event and state and understand what's happening without actually going through the code, and then basically use the events and state. With qubit, it like you can only like call methods, which for me is harder to trace if you have like something very complex and you have like maybe 10 events or 15 events.
Yeah.
So like it is a very readability, like any than actual functionality.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you said, like if it is just fetching the list, then you basically have one method, then it doesn't make sense to create like one class just to say that I'm fetching a list and success and
That's true. That's true. Yeah. This thing. That is it from my side. But then I also like did like a small application, but it's let me.
I see in the chat that Stefano said that Riverboard is good, and Lauri asked if Riverboard succeed without the boilerplate load. I don't know if anyone here has answers.
I mean, like, I have not worked with Riverboard, but I've just like read about something. But I think like Riverboard and I think provider in general, they already have like less boilerplate code compared to Flutter and Block. So I don't know how much
they are more open-ended in the sense that you have to provide your own architecture sort of around it to build something more consistent. So, but you can do whatever you want with it in that sense. And Riverboard handles streams beautifully.
Yeah.
Really nicely.
Okay.
I also have a question.
And async data.
So block Flutter library is like a kind of block patterns library, but is there anything in that library that you don't like? Like, okay, you want to use block, but block library use the block this way. I wish it wouldn't use. For example, in my case, I don't like to have built-when logic inside the view, so to take decisions there.
Yeah, but then where do you actually handle it?
Well, if you use provider, you could do inside the provider, so take decisions and.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm at that stage already where I could like say what I would not use or what would bother me using block. Yeah. I don't know about this one.
One more question. When you use block, something that bothers me is that like with navigation. So like if you use block, for example, to like load something and then initiate it and all of this thing, and then now you have multiple, like based on the user event, you have multiple routes that you can go. So if this succeeds, for example, then check if the user have this and then so on. So do you put this navigation logic in block or Cube, or do you actually use like something like routing API, like routing plugin?
No, I've used it like in the block itself.
So the status becomes things like the block status becomes like, for example, if authenticated and verified go there, and if authenticated and
then the
not
same
verified.
Yeah.
So you have state for like, and do you use like one block for it? So for example, if I want to check if the user is verified and or not, and authenticated or not. So do you use like authentication block and verification block to check?
No, I've only used the authentication block. Like I have not like further separated it if the user is like verified or not. But I've always used like just one authentication block and then the rest like user and everything. So once the user.
Yeah. So inside the block itself. So
Yeah.
you check if it's authenticated or not, and then inside the block check if it is verified or not. And then like have authenticated, verified, authenticated, non-verified, non-authenticated.
Yeah, I mean, so far I've always had like very simple situations.
Okay.
So it's always been like a very simple authentication flow.
Yeah.
So maybe if in future if there's a situation where I have to check, then maybe it makes sense. But I don't know, so far I haven't had like any situation where I would use like two different blocks to check the authentication and verification. we done? Yeah.
Are you done?
Oh, no, I'm not done.
You had an app you mentioned.
Where the demo is.
I completely forgot.
In relation to how popular this package is, I do have some stats on that too, but basically GetX is the most popular one, followed by Provider and then Block, and then I think Riverpod has caught up to the 4th place now.
Yeah.
So I occasionally publish some stats on Flutter on this as well.
Okay.
It's also sponsored by very good ventures and stream, so
Yeah.
maintained well.
I think for me, like one nice thing with the blog has also been like the support, the community support, like documents and everything. And this the guy, the Felix guy, is like quite accessible in that sense. So it's been like a really nice thing. But how do I share this? Yeah, I just because there's already like an example on the blog authentication. So I just like created like a small app and put the code on the. It just follows the same example through, but in the example you don't actually make like an API call or anything. So this one just makes like an API call and gets the access token. So it's like a very basic demo, but the idea is to use block and just to display like how everything works. But let's see. Okay, I should hide my screen somehow so you don't see my stupid password. very sturdy.
They all screen copied it in the stream.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I hope it works. So this basically just makes who's controlling the?
Oh, sorry, I put the chat.
Oh, okay. I'm like, okay, so this basically just connects to like a backend that I'm running locally, and just does the basic authentication on that, and just fetches like some stuff. So like this is the access token that prints. Very simple, very basic. But it just maybe if I put this, someone if they want, they can like extend this further and then use this as like a boilerplate for basic authentication, and then get other stuff. So yeah, that is it.